You did not kill that plant. The label did. Because somewhere in the last few seasons you stood in a garden center, read the word easy on a label, took the plant home, did everything right, and it died anyway. Or it struggled, or it gave you 2 good years and then quietly disappeared, and you blamed yourself the way most gardeners do, because nobody ever explained that the word easy on a plant label is one of the least reliable pieces of information in the entire gardening industry. There are plants sold in every garden center in the world right now as low-maintenance perennials, as beginner-friendly choices, as set-it-and-forget-it purchases that are none of those things. Not because they are bad plants, but because the conditions printed on that label are not the conditions in your garden. And the nursery does not mention that, because the nursery makes money when you buy the plant, and it makes money again when you replace it. 9 of them. 9 plants that are sold as easy, reliable, or carefree, and are not. Not for most gardens, not for most soil types, not for most gardeners who were never told the thing the label left out, and the one at number 6. It is sitting on the bestsellers shelf at your local garden center right now. It is probably the most purchased flowering shrub in the temperate world, and most of the people who buy it have no idea what it does after the first season. Let us start. Plant number 1. Lavender. Picture a summer afternoon. The lavender is in full bloom. Purple spikes, grey-green foliage, the scent drifting across the patio every time the breeze moves through. It looks the way a garden is supposed to look. Easy, timeless. The kind of planting that belongs on the front of a seed catalogue. That is the version they sell you. That is the version on the label. Here is the version they do not mention. Lavender is a Mediterranean plant. It evolved in conditions that are the exact opposite of most temperate gardens. Rocky, sandy, almost infertile soil that drains immediately after rain. Full sun every day, dry summers, and most critically, roots that are never, ever sitting in water. Most temperate gardens have none of that. They have clay, or heavy loam, or soil that holds moisture, and in that soil, lavender does not thrive. It survives sometimes for a season or 2. And then a wet winter arrives, water sits around the crown, the roots suffocate, and by spring there is a brown skeleton where your lavender used to be. Here is the part that makes it a trap. When lavender starts to die in heavy soil, it looks exactly like drought stress. The stems droop, the leaves go dull, the plant looks thirsty, so you water it. And the watering is what finishes it. The root rot that kills lavender in clay and loam does not announce itself clearly. It mimics the symptoms of underwatering so precisely that most gardeners make the problem worse trying to solve it. They water a plant that is drowning and wonder why it keeps declining. This is not a beginner mistake. This is a plant that is genuinely difficult in any soil that retains moisture. Horticultural professionals who work with clay soil will tell you the same thing. Lavender in the open ground, in heavy soil, without significant drainage improvement, is a short-term plant. Not a permanent one. The label says USDA zones 5 through 8, RHS H5, full sun, well-drained soil. That last part, well-drained soil, that is doing a lot of work in a very small space. Here is what well-drained soil actually means for lavender. Not just reasonably well drained, not the soil in your border that drains over a day or 2 after rain. Soil that sheds water almost immediately. Soil with 50% grit or coarse sand mixed through it. Soil that is closer to a gravel bed than a garden border. That is what lavender wants. That is what it thrives in. In a container with the right gritty mix, terracotta pot, no saucer, lavender can be genuinely excellent. But planted straight into the average temperate border, bought on impulse in spring because it looked beautiful in the garden center. It is a 2-year plant, at best, for most people, and nobody writes that on the label. Here is the fix. If you want lavender in the ground, dig the planting hole wide and fill it back with 50% of your native soil and 50% horticultural grit or coarse sand. Plant it slightly proud of the surrounding level, so the crown sits higher than the bed around it. Never mulch with organic material that holds moisture against the stem, or grow it in a pot, terracotta, half compost and half grit, no saucer. That is the environment it is actually asking for. In those conditions, it lives, sometimes for a decade or more. Have you tried lavender more than once? Did it make it past year 3? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. Plant number 2. Lupine. There is a specific kind of heartbreak that comes with lupines, and it goes like this. You plant them, they are extraordinary in their first season. That spike of color, rising straight and dense in late spring. Purple or pink or deep blue against the green border is one of the most genuinely beautiful things a garden can produce. You are pleased with yourself. You have got it right. Second season, they come back. Perhaps a little smaller, a little less vigorous, but there they are, and you feel validated. Third season, nothing, or almost nothing, a sparse, struggling remnant of what you had before, and by season 4 they are gone, and you blame the soil, or the weather, or your technique, when the truth is much simpler. Lupines are short-lived perennials. The Russell hybrids, which is what virtually every garden center sells, rarely survive beyond 2 to 3 years in garden conditions. Some sources say up to 5 years in ideal conditions, but ideal conditions for lupines are quite specific, and most gardens do not have them. They want cool, moist summers. Acid to neutral soil, well-drained but not dry. They struggle in alkaline soil, which much of the UK and many parts of North America have in abundance. They despise heat. They resent heavy clay, and they are extremely attractive to slugs, which can devastate a whole planting in a single wet spring night. The label says perennial, and technically, that is not wrong. A plant that lives 2 or 3 years is a perennial by definition. But when most people read perennial on a plant label, they picture something that is still in their garden in a decade. Lupines are not that plant. They are in the industry classification that nobody puts on labels, a short-lived perennial, a category that sounds almost like a contradiction, but is entirely real and enormously useful to know about when you are spending money at a garden center. Here is the deepest part of the trap. Lupines seed freely. If you let them go to seed, you will have seedlings the following year, and the seedlings will look exactly like the original plant. So the gap left by a dying lupine fills itself with new growth, and many gardeners never notice the original plant died. They think they have a permanent planting. They actually have a revolving door of seedlings that never match the color or vigor of the original cultivar. The facts: USDA zones 4 through 8, RHS H5 to H6, full sun to partial shade, blooms in late spring to early summer. Absolutely spectacular for those 2 to 3 seasons. And then you are buying again. That is not on the label. The label just says perennial. Here is what to do with that information. Buy lupines for the show they put on, not for the permanence they imply. Get 3 to 5 plants. Let them seed freely by leaving some spent heads on the plant in early summer. The seedlings that germinate will not perfectly match the parent in color, but they will be vigorous and they will be free. Plan to replace the original plants every 3 years. If you go in knowing this, lupines become a rolling, self-renewing display rather than a disappointment. The problem was never the plant. It was the expectation the label created. Plant number 3, Delphinium. Let us be direct about delphiniums, because the gap between how they are sold and what they actually require is one of the widest in mainstream gardening. Every catalogue photograph of delphiniums shows the same thing: towering spikes of deep blue or violet, 4 to 5 feet tall, completely vertical, massed together in a border with nothing else visible. It looks effortless. It looks like they just grew that way. Here is what the photograph does not show: the hours spent staking each individual spike before the wind hit it. The slug pellets laid down in early spring before the new shoots were an inch tall, because slugs treat delphinium shoots as a delicacy and will consume an entire planting in a single night if you do not intervene. The watering schedule, because delphiniums want consistently moist soil through the growing season and will sulk visibly if they get irregular moisture. The cutting back after the first flush, the feeding to encourage the second flush, the dead hutting, the watching for powdery mildew in dry spells. None of that is on the label. The label says perennial. It says full sun. It might say well-drained soil. It does not say what it actually means to grow delphiniums properly, and here is the cruel part. Delphiniums are not impossible. Experienced gardeners with the right conditions, who understand what the plant needs and are prepared to provide it, can grow them beautifully. They are genuinely spectacular when they work, but sold as a beginner plant, sold as a low-maintenance perennial, sold to someone who has just started gardening and wants color and drama without complexity. They are a setup for disappointment. The staking alone is significant. Delphiniums in exposed positions will blow over or break or lean at angles that ruin the display if they are not staked before they need it. Staking after the plant has already started to lean is harder and often damages the stems. You need to stake early, stake properly, and check the stakes through the season. For every plant, every year. Add to that the slug pressure in spring, which is severe enough that many gardeners put physical barriers around individual plants as well as bait. Add the mildew risk. Add the watering, and you have a plant that requires consistent, attentive care from early spring through late summer. Sold on a shelf next to plants that genuinely need almost nothing. USDA zones 3 through 7, RHS H6. Spectacular. Demanding, not easy. If you want the tall blue vertical drama that delphiniums offer but without the maintenance, look at Veronicastrum virginicum instead. It gives you that same upright spike in white or pale lilac, reaches similar heights, is far more tolerant of average soil and inconsistent watering, does not need staking in most positions, and is genuinely perennial in the long-lived sense. It will not replace the specific saturated blue of a delphinium. Nothing will. But if the silhouette is what you want, and you want it without the weekly attention, Veronicastrum is the plant the garden center should have shown you next to the Delphinium. Plant number 4, butterfly bush. This one requires a different kind of conversation, because the trap with butterfly bush is not about difficulty. It is not about short lifespan. It is not about finicky soil requirements. The trap is what the plant does that nobody tells you about before you buy it. Butterfly bush is genuinely one of the easiest plants in the garden. It grows fast, it blooms for months through summer and into autumn. It produces long fragrant flower spikes in purple, white or pink, and it does attract butterflies genuinely and abundantly. On all of those points it delivers exactly what it promises. Here is what the label does not say. The original species, which is what the majority of butterfly bushes sold in most garden centers still are, is invasive in significant parts of the world. In the Pacific Northwest of North America, it is classified as a noxious weed. In Washington state and Oregon, it has been or continues to be subject to legal bans on sale and planting. It is listed as invasive in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Virginia, England, and New Zealand. It spreads by seed, prolifically, and its seedlings establish in riverbanks, roadsides, and natural areas where it displaces native vegetation. The irony is significant. You plant it for butterflies. You put it in the garden because you care about wildlife. And the plant spreads beyond your garden into wild spaces where it competes with the native plants that butterflies and other pollinators actually depend on for their entire life cycle, not just their nectar. The label does not say any of this. The label shows a butterfly on a purple spike. It says easy. It says pollinator friendly. And that is true as far as it goes. The question the label does not ask you is, where does it go after your garden? New sterile cultivars exist, and they are worth knowing about. Plant breeders have developed varieties that produce less than 2% viable seed, which is a meaningful improvement. If you want butterfly bush, find those specific cultivars. Ask the garden center directly whether the plant you are buying is a confirmed sterile variety, not the original species. If they cannot tell you, do not buy it. This is not a plant to avoid entirely. It is a plant to buy with information you almost certainly will not be given unless you ask for it. This is exactly the kind of thing your local garden center is not going to bring up unprompted. The profit is in the sale. The consequences are in your garden and your local environment. The practical step is simple. Before you buy any butterfly bush, ask specifically for a named sterile cultivar. The Lo and Behold series is widely available and confirmed low fertility. Pugster and Flutterby varieties are also bred for reduced seed production. These plants give you most of the same visual appeal and nectar value with a fraction of the ecological risk. If the garden center cannot tell you whether the plant is sterile or not, put it back and find one that can. Drop your country in the comments. Tell me whether butterfly bush is sold where you are, and whether anyone told you about its invasive status before today. I want to know how widely this information is missing. Plant number 5, Gaillardia. Gaillardia, also called blanket flower, is one of the most cheerful-looking plants on any garden center shelf in summer. The flowers are warm and vivid, red and orange and yellow in circular patterns, like something a child would draw when asked to paint a summer garden. It blooms from early summer and keeps going. It tolerates drought. It does not need rich soil. On every practical measure of ease, it genuinely delivers. The first season, sometimes the second, and then it is gone. Gaillardia is a short-lived perennial. Most varieties maintain any real vigor for 2 to 3 years. After that, the clump gets congested, the flowering diminishes, and the plant declines. In warmer climates, it often behaves essentially as an annual. Buy it in spring, get one brilliant season, and by winter it is finished. The label says perennial. It does not say that perennial, in this case, means 2 to 3 years in most conditions. Here is the specific version of this trap. Gaillardia is often bought by gardeners who want permanent color in a hot, dry spot. That is exactly the right instinct. Those spots are hard to fill. Gaillardia looks like the answer. Drought-tolerant, full sun, big bright flowers, perfect. And it is perfect for a season or two, but the hot, dry spot is still going to need filling again in year 3. And the gardener who thought they had solved that problem with a perennial has to start again. If you want something in that spot that genuinely lasts, Echinacea, which is the purple coniflower, in the right variety, will outlive a Gaillardia by a decade. Rudbeckia, the black-eyed Susan, is more reliably perennial. Agastache, the hyssop, has its own short lifespan issues but at least seeds itself freely. None of them have the same warm red-orange color palette as Gaillardia, which is genuinely where it earns its place. But if permanence is what you need, Gaillardia is not the answer the label implies. There is also a watering dimension to this that nobody explains. Gaillardia is described as drought-tolerant, and it is. But drought-tolerant does not mean it prefers dry conditions. It means it survives them without dying immediately. A plant under drought stress flowers less abundantly, declines faster, and exhausts its lifespan quicker than a plant growing in conditions it actually prefers. The gardener who plants Gaillardia in a hot, dry spot and gives it nothing watches it bloom adequately for one season, thin out in the second, and disappear by the third. And they conclude the plant is not reliable, when what actually happened is that the plant was told by its conditions to burn through its resources fast and exit early. Gaillardia in a sunny spot with reasonable, not excessive, moisture and decent drainage can push closer to 4 or 5 years. It is still short-lived, but it is not the one-season disappointment it becomes under neglect. The label does not make this distinction. It says drought-tolerant and leaves you to interpret that however you choose. USDA zones 3 through 10, RHS H7. Wide climate tolerance, genuinely. But short-lived regardless. If you've made it this far and you're not subscribed, do it now. YouTube does not keep showing you channels you do not follow. It does not slow down the recommendations. It stops them entirely. Hit subscribe. It costs nothing. Plant number 6, Peony. This is the one I told you about at the start. Walk into any garden center from mid-spring onwards. Find the flowering perennials section. There will be peonies. They will be beautiful, full of promise, often already in bud. The large globular flowers in pink or white, or deep red visible and lush on the shelf. The label will say perennial. It will describe the eventual flower size, the fragrance, the long lifespan. It will probably mention that peonies can live for 50 years. What it will not say is this: if you are planting a bare root peony, you may wait 3 to 5 years before it produces its first proper flower. And if you plant it at the wrong depth, which is very easy to do, it may never flower at all. That second part bears repeating. The difference between a peony that blooms magnificently and a peony that produces only foliage year after year for no apparent reason is often a matter of centimeters. Peonies should be planted with the eyes, the red buds at the top of the root, no more than about 5 centimeters below the soil surface. In colder climates, some growers say slightly deeper, but the margin for error is extremely small. Plant too deep and the peony will grow. It will return every spring. It will be perfectly healthy. It will simply never flower. Most gardeners who plant a bare root peony and get no flowers after 2 or 3 years assume they have done something wrong in a general sense. They fertilize differently. They water more or less. They tried different locations. They do not suspect that the entire problem is depth, which cannot be corrected without lifting and replanting the root. There are also peonies sold in containers, already established, often already in bloom. These are more reliable in the short term, but significantly more expensive, and they come with their own trap. Peony roots deeply resent disturbance. A container peony transplanted in summer, when it is in full growth, may sulk for a full season before recovering. The shock of transplanting can suppress flowering for 1 to 2 years even in a correctly established plant. The label does not mention the planting depth requirement. It rarely mentions the transplant sensitivity, and it almost never mentions the 3 to 5 year wait for a bare root plant. The long lifespan is real. A peony properly planted and left undisturbed can be an extraordinary garden plant for decades. But the path from purchase to first flower is far longer and more specific than anything on the label suggests. USDA zones 3 through 8, RHS H7. Plant with the eyes no more than 5 centimeters deep. Do not move it once it is established, then wait and wait. And when it finally flowers, it will be worth every year. But nobody tells you about the years in between. Plant number 7, Russian sage. Russian sage is sold extensively as a low-maintenance, drought-tolerant perennial, and in that description it is completely accurate. Russian sage is genuinely low-maintenance and genuinely drought-tolerant. In the right conditions, it is one of the most reliable and long-lived plants you can put in a garden. The long stems of lavender blue flowers from midsummer into autumn are beautiful. It works in dry soil, it works in hot positions, it does not need feeding. The trap is not in the growing. The trap is in what happens when you try to manage it. Russian sage needs hard pruning every spring, not a light trim, not a gentle tidy, hard, back to the base, cutting all the previous year's growth down to a low framework of woody stems, about 15 to 20 centimeters from the ground. Do that, and the plant rewards you with vigorous new growth, strong structure, and months of flowers. Cut into old wood at the wrong time, or cut it back in autumn when the growth is still present, or prune it lightly and leave long woody stems thinking you are being careful. And the plant frequently does not recover. Russian sage does not regenerate from old wood the way many shrubby plants do. Unlike lavender, which struggles with heavy pruning into old wood, Russian sage needs that hard spring cut specifically to stimulate the right kind of regrowth from its base. This sounds like a specific piece of information. It is, but it is exactly the kind of specific piece of information that makes the difference between a plant that lives 10 years and a plant that dies in year 3, because the person tending it was being careful and did the wrong kind of careful. There is a second element to the Russian sage trap that compounds this. In cold climates, the old growth provides winter protection to the base of the plant. Many experienced gardeners leave the old stems standing through winter deliberately, knowing that the hollow stems and dead foliage insulate the crown against the hardest frosts. They cut in spring, not autumn. This is correct technique. But a new gardener, looking at the brown dead stems from the previous season, naturally wants to tidy them away. That instinct, the tidying instinct, is one of the most common causes of unnecessary plant loss across the whole of perennial gardening. And it hits Russian sage particularly hard because the plant looks exceptionally untidy in late autumn and winter, just the kind of plant that triggers the urge to cut it back immediately. The label says low maintenance. It does not say low maintenance unless you prune it the way you would most other plants, in which case you may kill it. USDA zones 5 through 9, RHSH5, full sun, very free draining soil. If you have those conditions and you know the pruning rule, Russian sage is excellent. If you do not know the pruning rule, it is a plant waiting for one well-intentioned mistake. Plant number 8, ornamental grass. This entry is specifically about the larger ornamental grasses, miscanthus, the silver grass in particular, but also the larger fountain grasses, the giant feather grasses, and any ornamental grass, sold in a pot that looks compact and manageable at the point of purchase. The trap is a scale trap, and it operates over time. You buy the pot. It is 30 centimeters across, maybe 40. The clump looks controlled and elegant. The label mentions the eventual height. Often, it might mention the eventual spread, and those numbers are accurate. What the label cannot convey is what those numbers look like in practice, in your garden 4 or 5 years from planting. A clump of Miscanthus sinensis, the most commonly sold variety, can reach 150 to 180 centimeters tall and 100 to 120 centimeters wide at maturity. That is a substantial plant. In the right position, with the right context and enough space, it is spectacular. The late-season seed heads catching low autumn light are one of the more genuinely beautiful things a temperate garden can offer. But placed next to smaller perennials without understanding the eventual scale, a mature ornamental grass does not share space, it takes it. The clump expands outward, the foliage creates shade and root competition, and neighboring plants are gradually suppressed. This happens slowly enough that many gardeners do not connect the decline of the surrounding planting to the expanding grass clump until the problem is well established. Dividing and reducing an ornamental grass clump at maturity is also significantly harder work than most plant care tasks. The root mass of a well-established miscanthus is dense, fibrous, and heavy. You need serious tools and genuine effort to reduce it once it has been in the ground for 5 or more years. Some experienced gardeners use a spade. Some use a saw. Some have resorted to a pickaxe. This is not a plant you casually lift and divide on a weekend afternoon. It is a physical project. There is also a timing dimension that compounds the scale problem. Ornamental grasses look best in late summer and autumn, when the seed heads are fully developed and catching the light. This is when they earn their keep in the garden. But it is also the season when you are least likely to notice that they have been quietly advancing into the space of neighboring plants for the past 3 years. You're enjoying the display. The problem is building underneath it. By the time the encroachment becomes obvious, in spring when the surrounding plants either fail to return or return visibly diminished, the grass clump has already won that ground. Reclaiming it requires reducing the grass, which is the hard physical task already described, and then managing the recovering neighbors, which takes another full season. The label shows the plant that exists now. It does not show the plant in 5 years. That gap is where the regret lives. If you want ornamental grass in a smaller garden or a mixed border, look at the compact varieties specifically. Hakonecloa, the Japanese forest grass, stays genuinely small and is well behaved in shared spaces. Stipa tenuissima, the Mexican feathergrass, gives you beautiful movement and is self-seeding rather than clump spreading, which is a different and more manageable kind of vigor. Neither of these has the same dramatic presence as a mature miscanthus, but they will not quietly take over the rest of your planting while you are enjoying the autumn display. Think about one person in your life who is about to make a purchase at a garden center without knowing any of this. Send this video to them before they get there. No message needed, just the link. Plant number 9, Columbine. The Aquilegia is one of the most beautiful plants in a spring garden. The flowers are extraordinary, intricate, spurred in every color from white through yellow, pink, purple, and deep blue. It self-seeds freely, fills gaps in the border with new plants every year, and tolerates partial shade better than most flowering perennials. On any honest assessment of its qualities, columbine deserves its place in the garden. The trap is specifically about the word perennial on the label, and about what self-seeding actually means in practice. Aquilegia is a short-lived perennial. The individual plant that you purchase, or that germinates from seed, will typically flower beautifully for 2 to 3 years and then decline. It does not age gracefully. It does not slowly reduce like a shrub that can be rejuvenated. It flowers, diminishes, and dies. What keeps Aquilegia appearing in a garden is not the original plant returning. It is self-seeding. The plant sets enormous quantities of seed every year, and those seeds germinate freely in the following season, producing new plants that then flower, set seed, and also eventually die. What looks like a permanent planting is actually a continuously renewing population of short-lived plants, none of which is the one you originally bought. This matters for 2 reasons. First, if you want to maintain a specific color or form of Aquilegia, self-seeding will not preserve it. Aquilegia cross-pollinates enthusiastically between varieties. The seedlings will be hybrids, increasingly distant from the parent plant in color and form. Within 3 to 4 generations, a planting that started as a specific named variety, say a particular shade of deep blue, will have diversified into a mixture of colors and forms that may or may not be what you want. The original plant is long gone. What remains are descendants, genetically distinct. Second, if you plant columbine in a tidy, controlled border where self-seeding in unexpected positions is unwanted, columbine is going to create work. The seedlings come up where they choose, not where you plan. Managing them requires either weeding out unwanted seedlings annually or accepting that the border will self-organize according to the plant's preferences rather than yours. There is a third thing worth knowing, which is almost never on the label. Aquilegia is toxic. The whole plant, seeds, leaves, and flowers, contains compounds that are harmful if ingested in any significant quantity. This is not a reason to avoid it. It is, however, information that matters if you have young children or animals who spend time in the garden. The seeds in particular are attractive to children. That information belongs on the label. It is not there. Neither of these things is a disaster, but neither is what the word perennial usually implies to a gardener standing in a garden center trying to make a sensible decision. USDA zones 3 through 9, RHS H7, hardy everywhere, easy to grow, genuinely beautiful. Short-lived in itself, persistent through self-seeding, gradually diverging from the original in form. A wonderful plant to know accurately. A mild trap when all you know is the label. Here is how to use columbine. Well, buy 2 or 3 plants of whatever color you want most. Let them seed freely for the first 2 or 3 years. Accept that the seedlings will start to hybridize and the palette will shift. Either embrace that gradual drift as part of what the plant does, or in year 3, pull all but a few of your favorite seedlings and start again with fresh bought plants in the colors you want. That cycle, buy, enjoy, seed, refresh, gives you years of beautiful spring color and costs almost nothing once the initial plants have done their work. The regret only comes from expecting permanence from a plant that was never built for it. Let us bring this together. 9 plants, all sold as easy, low maintenance, or reliable, all containing a piece of information that the label leaves out, not because the label is technically wrong, but because the label tells you what is convenient to know at the point of sale, not what is necessary to know at the point of planting. Lavender, which dies in heavy soil through a mechanism that looks like drought and is therefore made worse by the obvious response. Lupine, which is honestly beautiful for 2 or 3 years and then gone, sold as a perennial without the word short-lived in front of it. Delphinium, which requires staking, regular slug control, consistent moisture and careful management, sold alongside plants that genuinely need almost nothing. Butterfly bush, which is invasive in significant parts of the world, sold enthusiastically as a wildlife plant with no mention of where that wildlife-attracting plant goes after your garden. Gaillardia, vivid and cheerful and genuinely short-lived, sold as a permanent solution to a problem it will solve for 2 seasons and then stop solving. Peony, which can live for 50 years, but may not flower for 5, which will never flower if planted at the wrong depth, which is easy to plant at the wrong depth, and where none of this is on the label. Russian sage, which thrives on hard pruning and dies on gentle pruning, and where knowing the difference between those 2 things requires information that is not available at the point of purchase. Ornamental grass, which is compact and elegant in the pot and large and eventually dominant in the ground, where the full picture of its scale only becomes clear several seasons after the purchase. And columbine, which is genuinely beautiful and genuinely short-lived, persistent through self-seeding, gradually changing from what you planted. And none of that is what most people understand the word perennial to mean. Here's the truth underneath all of this. The nursery industry does not benefit from you knowing which plants are short-lived. It does not benefit from you knowing which plants require specific conditions that your garden may not provide. It does not benefit from you knowing which plants are invasive in your region, or which plants require a specific pruning technique, or which plants will take 5 years to flower. It benefits from you buying the plant, and from you returning, season after season, to replace the plants that did not work out. That cycle is not gardening failure. It is the business model. You are not a bad gardener. You were given incomplete information and told the outcome was your responsibility. None of these plants is impossible. All of them can be grown well by someone who knows what they are actually dealing with. Lavender in the right soil, or in a container. Lupines with the expectation that they will need replacing every 3 years. Delphiniums by someone who wants to invest in their care. Butterfly bush in a confirmed sterile cultivar. Gaillardia for a short-term vivid display, not a permanent solution. Peony planted at exactly the right depth in the right position, with patience. Russian sage with the correct hard pruning in spring. Ornamental grass in a space that is genuinely large enough for what it becomes. Columbine with the understanding that what you are buying is a generation, not a permanent presence. That information is available, but you have to know to look for it, and the garden center will not go out of its way to tell you. Now you know. Subscribe if you have not already. Hit the bell and leave a comment telling me 2 things. Which of these 9 have you grown, and what happened? And where in the world are you gardening? Because a garden in clay soil in northern England deals with completely different conditions to a garden in sandy soil in coastal California, or a balcony in New Zealand, or a plot in South Africa. Where you are matters. Tell me. This is your garden. This is your season. Go plant something.